After the collapse of the Russian Empire and the end of World War I, Europe's borders were in chaos. Poland, after over a century of foreign domination, re-emerged as an independent state in 1918. But that independence was immediately tested. As German troops retreated from Eastern Europe, two powers rushed to fill the vacuum: the newly reborn Polish state and the Bolshevik-led Red Army. What followed was the Polish-Soviet War, a brutal and messy conflict over borderlands that had been contested for centuries. At first, the war centered on Ukrainian and Belarusian territory, but it quickly escalated into a fight for control over Poland itself. Lenin believed that once Red Army troops entered Polish-majority areas, the workers there would rise up in solidarity. But Stalin disagreed. He warned that nationalism would overpower ideology. And he was right. When Polish forces pushed deep into Ukraine and briefly took Kiev, the Red Army struck back. But at the gates of Warsaw in 1920, they were stopped cold. The Red Army was crushed, forced to retreat hundreds of miles. For the Soviets, it was a humiliating failure. But for Stalin, it was a lesson. The Polish people wouldn't be conquered easily, and they certainly wouldn't become Soviets just because someone told them they should.
Nearly 2 decades later, Stalin saw a second opportunity. In 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a secret agreement, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, dividing Eastern Europe into 2 spheres of influence. On paper, it was a non-aggression treaty, but in reality, it was a plan to carve up the continent. When Germany invaded Western Poland, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. Within weeks, Poland was wiped off the map, again. The Red Army seized vast territories and absorbed them directly into the Soviet Union. These were the same lands the Soviets had failed to hold 2 decades earlier. This time, there was no war between the USSR and Poland. The Polish army was overwhelmed, and the country had no chance to resist on 2 fronts. The new border between Germany and the USSR was drawn roughly along the Curzon line, the same border the Allies had once proposed after World War I. In these newly conquered lands, the Soviets moved fast. Mass arrests, deportations, and executions targeted anyone seen as a threat. But this brutal occupation didn't wipe out Polish identity, it only deepened the hatred. And while the deal with Hitler gave Stalin what he wanted temporarily, it wouldn't last long. Because just 2 years later, Hitler turned on the Soviet Union, and the entire balance of power shifted again.
By 1945, the war had flipped. Nazi Germany was on the verge of collapse, and the Soviet Union had pushed deep into Eastern Europe. The Red Army had not only defeated the Nazis, it had occupied nearly every country between Moscow and Berlin, including all of Poland. Stalin now has something he had only dreamed of in 1920: total control over Polish territory. But unlike the first time, there was no battle at Warsaw, no need to fight for it. The West, exhausted from years of war, was eager to avoid further conflict. At the Yalta Conference, Roosevelt and Churchill reluctantly agreed to Soviet influence over Poland, hoping to secure Soviet cooperation in the Pacific and in creating the United Nations. Stalin had full military control and political leverage. He could have done what he had done to Ukraine or the Baltics. He could have made Poland vanish as an independent nation and absorbed it into the Soviet Union completely. But he didn't. Instead, he waited. As Soviet-installed communists took over the Polish government and eliminated political opponents, Stalin prepared for the next phase of his plan. Poland wasn't free, far from it. But it wasn't Soviet territory either. And that wasn't a mistake. It was a choice.
The decision not to annex Poland wasn't made out of kindness. It was cold calculation. Stalin remembered the failures of 1920. He had seen firsthand how fiercely the Polish people clung to their national identity, even in the face of overwhelming force. And unlike the tiny Baltic states, which had populations of just a few million, Poland was home to over 25 million people. Trying to forcibly integrate such a large, hostile population into the USSR would have been a logistical nightmare and a constant source of unrest. The Soviet Union already struggled to manage dissent within its own republics. Absorbing Poland would only pour gasoline on that fire. Worse, a rebellion inside Poland could inspire other Soviet minorities to resist as well. Stalin wasn't afraid of using force, but he knew better than to overextend. Creating a nominally independent Poland gave him everything he needed: a loyal government, total control over military and foreign policy, and access to Polish industry, all without the heavy burden of direct rule. The Polish flag might still fly, but it would wave under Moscow's orders.
There was also the matter of appearances. The Soviet Union had just fought alongside the Allies in defeating Nazi Germany. Stalin didn't want to ruin his new image as a partner in peace by openly annexing a European country. Annexing Poland would have looked like outright conquest, and the West, though weakened, would have had no choice but to react. Instead, creating a Polish People's Republic allowed Stalin to claim that Poland had chosen socialism on its own through democratic means. It was a lie, but it was a convenient one. To the outside world, Poland remained an independent country, a proud member of the United Nations and a sovereign state. But behind the scenes, everything, from the media to the military, was controlled by Soviet hands. This setup was perfect for Cold War propaganda. While Western leaders called it a puppet regime, the Soviets insisted it was a free ally. The truth was somewhere in between, but closer to puppet than partner. And by avoiding direct annexation, Stalin could preserve the illusion of a peaceful Soviet bloc, even as he ruled it with an iron fist.
Stalin wasn't just thinking about Poland, he was thinking about the entire Soviet Union. Inside his own borders, dozens of ethnic groups were already restless. In the Baltics, in the Caucasus, and in Central Asia, resistance simmered just below the surface. Adding Poland, a country with a long history of rebellion and a deeply Catholic anti-Soviet population, would have been like inviting a bomb into his own house. Stalin understood the danger of internal collapse. One strong act of rebellion could inspire others. If Poland became part of a USSR and started resisting, how long would it be before others followed? A puppet state, however, could be controlled from a distance. Poland would have its own secret police, its own communist leaders, and its own tools for suppressing dissent, all of them trained in Moscow's methods. This not only made control cheaper and more efficient, it also gave Stalin plausible deniability. If things went wrong in Poland, the blame could fall on local officials, not the Soviet Union. It was a shield against rebellion, both at home and abroad.
And so, in February 1947, the Polish People's Republic was officially declared. It was framed as a victory for socialism, a peaceful transition, a sign that Poland had chosen its own future. But in reality, the entire process had been orchestrated by Moscow. Opposition parties were crushed, independent voices were silenced, and every major institution, from education to the army, was reshaped in the Soviet image. The Polish United Workers' Party, created and backed by Stalin, took complete control. The new government pledged loyalty to the USSR in all things. But to the world, Poland remained independent. That was the genius and the danger of Stalin's plan. He didn't need to raise a Soviet flag over Warsaw. He already owned everything that mattered: the government, the land, the people. Through fear, manipulation, and calculated restraint, he got what he wanted, without having to bear the cost of open occupation. For Poland, it was independence in name only. For Stalin, it was victory without annexation. And for the world, it was a warning of how empires would be built, not by war, but by shadows.